Psychonaut Crew. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for today's episode because this episode is not only going to be released on Spotify, but it is the first episode of the Brave Psychonaut that will make its way to YouTube. So I am broadening out by doing video-based podcasts because that just sounds super fun and like a natural progression of the show. If you are brand new to the Brave Psychonaut and you're like, what are you saying? What is the Brave Psychonaut? Let me introduce myself. My name's Megan. I am the podcast host, and the Brave Psychonaut is all about health, wellness, and spirituality. So I have released about 20 episodes on Spotify so far, and they've ranged from talking about naturopathic medicine, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, to psychedelics as medicine, microdosing for your mental health, to also topics that are more near and dear to me and my friends, such as exploring queer identity, gender identity, recovering from restrictive eating and eating disorders, how to set boundaries. So there's been a lot that I've talked about so far, and that's because there's so much that falls under that health and wellness umbrella, including today's episode, which, as you can tell based on my Britney Spears cardboard cutout that my girlfriend got me for my birthday, and then my We Freed Britney hoodie. Today is going to be all about Britney Spears and her newly released memoir, The Woman in Me, which came out at the end of October of 2023. And I am not a fast reader by any means, so for me to read a book in like about 2 days is like really like saying something, but I'm super biased because I am a huge Britney Spears fan, so of course I breezed through it, made some notes, and highlighted this book as if I was back in like a high school English class because there's so much good stuff in here, and I knew while reading this I wanted to speak to this on my podcast. So for today, I will be talking through why I love Britney Spears so much, what is the history of my fandom, and then moving through to The Woman in Me and going through 10-ish chapter segments. So it's not like chapter by chapter because that would be like a 5-hour podcast. So I'll give you a summary of each 10 chapters and then giving you my thoughts and impressions and like key highlights. So that's going to be what we'll do today. So with that being said, let's kick things off.
It's Britney, bitch.
So here is my spiel on why I love Britney, where my love for her came from, and how my fan love for her evolved into me becoming involved in the Free Britney movement in 2020 and 2021. So I was born in the late 90s, which means that as long as Britney has been making music, I have been listening to music. She is one of the first artists that became super familiar with. My parents used to play her music on our jukebox all the time growing up, and I used to watch her music videos. She was on TV everywhere, from award shows to talk shows and eventually movies and TV shows. So Britney was everywhere. She was one of the first artists that I really took a deep dive into, and I feel like I loved her from day one. Her music was so catchy. She embodied confidence so well. She was the it girl. She was the coolest person ever growing up. And I have stayed a loyal fan since. And I think also for me, growing up, a big part of Britney's appeal was she was simultaneously such a cool, sexy, confident person, but also was super sweet, down to earth, and innocent. So I feel like she kind of blended those energies so well together, which I think made her really appealing to a younger fan base because they felt like they could relate to her a lot more, knowing that she kind of had that sweet, southern, down-to-earth girl vibe. And so for me, moving from her earlier albums to In the Zone, I thought her music was so cool because my cousins listened to her. And they loved the song Toxic. They showed me Toxic, and I thought this was the coolest song ever. And so for me, it really strengthened that association of listening to Britney made you a cool person. And kind of moving through grade school and middle school, the Blackout album came out. And when I was reflecting back on Britney and childhood for me, such a core memory came up of my dad driving me to softball lessons and Britney's music from Blackout playing on the radio, which was Break the Ice, Give Me More, Radar. I mean, those were on repeat along with the Pussycat Dolls. And for me, I loved listening to the pop radio stations to listen to that music. And I don't think my dad like had any understanding that his like 10, 11-year-old daughter was like jamming out in her head thinking she was the coolest person for listening to Give Me More and imagining that she's dancing in a rave. I mean, I don't know, that's maybe like a little questionable, 11-year-old dancing in a rave, but you know what I mean? Like it transported you to a whole other universe of like partying, enjoying, and dancing. And honestly, to this day, I still think Blackout is one of the best pop albums of all time. And there's so much to back that up with, but that could literally be its own podcast episode. But what I will say is I personally feel like, and so many other fans feel this way, that you wouldn't have the music of Lady Gaga and the music of people like Kesha without Britney's Blackout album, because it was one of the first of its time to really blend in pop music with electronic music. I won't quite say like EDM, but definitely more of like an electronic club vibe. And that kind of created its whole other genre of pop music, which is so sick. So moving from Blackout to Circus, Femme Fatale, eventually Britney, Jean, and Glory, I stayed up to date with listening to Britney's music, continue to love her. But for me, I honestly was more so just a fan of Britney's music. I feel like I never really got into who she was as a person other than how she had presented on stage or TV shows or talk shows. So really it wasn't for me until 2020, 2021 where I started to take like a real deep dive into Britney. And a big inspiration for that was the recent light that was casted on her conservatorship and the abuse that was being called into allegation. So I will kind of like back up a little bit and say, growing up, I had listened to Britney's music a ton, and I also was super familiar with the news headlines about her being accused of being a bad mom, partying like a crazy person, on drugs, too thin, too fat, which again, that is literally the piece of me like lyric. But it was her, Lindsay Lohan, Paris Hilton that I feel like were always in the news headlines accused of being these out of control women. And I feel like growing up, I don't know if I totally bought into that narrative because, I mean, so much of it seemed clickbaity, which obviously was not a word at the time. Like, no one knew what clickbait was because we're talking about magazines and not the internet. But what I will say is, and I believe, and someone can correct me, I believe it was like 2007, 2008, when her shaving her head, and that was right around the Blackout album, shaving her head and then hitting the paparazzi's car with her umbrella. I definitely remember that being a huge deal and people being like, whoa, okay, Britney's now just beyond this crazy partier, which we'll get into with the memoir is not totally the case. But she's moving from this crazy partier to now being a crazy person. And that's how she was portrayed in the media. And I think at that point, a lot of people started buying into the news headlines of, oh, she's a super reckless person. And from there, she was then put into her conservatorship that lasted 13 years. So from 2008 to 2021, she was in this conservatorship. And I think so many of us who are fans assumed, okay, this is good for her mental health. Her finances are being taken care of. From a legal standpoint, this seems like the right thing to do. I mean, honestly, I didn't really think too much about her being in a conservatorship. I didn't really know what it was. I think we all thought it was a lot more minor than it wound up being. So there wasn't much for me to question until the Free Britney movement started to gain traction in the late 2010s and early 2020s. And that was right around that time that I started to take a deeper dive into learning about what this Free Britney movement was. And also coincided with the pandemic. So like I just like had more free time to do some research on, okay, why is this conservatorship actually harmful to Britney when we had thought it was super helpful for her? What is the abuse that is taking place under this conservatorship? Why is she unhappy? Because as a fan, it seemed confusing, right? Like she had her Vegas residency and she was still putting out pop hit after pop hit and new albums. So it seemed to be to her benefit. But taking a closer look, it was very easy to see that she was very miserable and her rights were getting stripped away from being in this conservatorship. So for me, that's kind of my timeline of being a Britney fan from the late 90s to then getting more interested in the Free Britney movement. And then for me, winding up actually going out to LA a few times for the Free Britney rallies. And by far my coolest Britney related memory has been going to her Freedom Rally, which is on November 12th, 2021, going to that final rally, which led to her freedom from the conservatorship. I thought that was the coolest thing. I kind of felt like a baby Britney fan, even though I'd listened to her music all my life, but there were people there that were hardcore into her from day one, and they're talking about, what's your favorite unreleased Britney song? I'm like, oh my God, okay, wait, I'm not at this level. Should I even be here? But I was there to support and march around the Sallie Moss Courthouse in LA, and it was one of the coolest experiences of my life, and it felt like a historic moment. So I am so happy to say that I'd been there. That I think was the peak of my fan status, of being a Britney fan. That was like platinum level Britney fan, and it was just the coolest thing ever. So honestly, since she got freed from the conservatorship after that Freedom Rally, stayed up to date somewhat with Britney news, but I had so much peace of mind knowing that the conservatorship was behind us. So it really hasn't been until the release of The Woman in Me that I've kind of gotten reinvigorated as a Britney fan, because this is the first time that she has put in writing, other than Instagram posts, but has put together a whole book, a whole synopsis of what her life has been like, even pre-conservatorship, and why things spiraled out the way they did, and how she was impacted. So, read this book in like 2 days. I had my notes, I highlighted, I had my rant against Justin Timberlake, and overall, it paints this tragic story of Britney being set up to fail from the beginning, even though obviously, yeah, she was this major mega pop star, but it really shows how she was set up to fail in terms of mental health from the beginning. And so, of course, with that being said, I'll get into my 10 chapter by 10 chapter, well, that's such an awkward way of putting it, but my 10 chapter segments of Britney's book, giving you a summary as to what it's about, and then giving my thoughts and impressions. So that being said, let's go through chapters 1 through 10. Chapters 1 through 10. So there are a few things that were especially noteworthy from these sections that I want to talk about. But before I even get into that, to paint the picture, if you have not read The Woman in Me, chapters 1 through 10 are Britney's early life growing up in Kentwood, Louisiana. Mercury in retrograde is kicking my butt. Anyway, growing up in Kentwood, and then her early rise to fame in the 90s. So, growing up in Kentwood, Britney talks about her love of music and how she knew from a young age she was meant to be a singer. She was even quoted saying, "When I sing, I know myself." She felt like it took her away to this fantasy world where she knew the universe and knew God. So, she had this strong talent and strong inner knowing that she was going to be a performer in some way, shape, or form. But I can imagine growing up in Kentwood, Louisiana, it's not like you have expanders out there who can point you the way to Broadway or to the bigger stage. So outside of singing, Britney was also in other activities like basketball. She said she was never a cheerleader type, especially with her dad being a big basketball player. So she loved playing sports. She loved being competitive in that way. I think it was even in these chapters, Britney talked about when she was younger, people asked what she wanted to do when she was older. She said she wanted to be a lawyer. So she loved performing and knew that she was a performer, but obviously didn't see to believe that that could be a career. I mean, who really does when you come from such humble upbringing? So that kind of goes over Britney's early life in Kentwood. Then the story even goes into people saying she was Broadway bound at a young age. They saw her perform, they saw her sing, she was entered in different competitions. and how she eventually landed on the Mickey Mouse Club at age 11 with big names like Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, Ryan Gosling. She speaks super fondly of this experience and said it was honestly playtime. It never felt like work. It just felt like everyone doing what they wanted to do and enjoying themselves. She kind of gets into having an eye for Justin Timberlake. Eventually that became a relationship down the road. So that kind of is it on Mickey Mouse Club. And then Britney talks about living in New York and eventually getting discovered to record music. Larry Rudolph, who, if you're a part of the Free Britney movement or familiar with the conservatorship, that is a name that you know and that you want to like burn into oblivion. And then Britney talks about getting a record deal at 15 with Jive Records and then eventually recording Baby One More Time. So I know I'm kind of like breezing through this quickly in terms of a timeline. Clearly, this could be done with more detail, but this is enough to kind of paint the picture as to what Britney talks about. So she talks about recording Baby One More Time, getting the record deal, and then that skyrocketing her to eventually becoming a household name. She then talks a little bit about her early love with Justin Timberlake, like I said. Now into the things that I think were really interesting to note within the chapter. So that's kind of like timeline, growing up in Kentwood, Baby One More Time, household name. So in between all of that, what I thought was interesting was Britney talking about the generational trauma, honestly, within her family. She talks about her grandpa, June Spears, in chapter 1, and on page 6 even talks about how he was this abusive, domineering figure who had sent not only one, but 2 wives away to asylums and put them on lithium, which is wild to me because that's exactly what happened to Britney and her conservatorship. And Britney talks about with her grandma, Jean, being put away in an asylum, she had spiraled out in her mental health after the loss of her baby, who only passed away after 3 days. And it's really heartbreaking to think that that was the solution at the time. Like, this woman's clearly super depressed. It's postpartum, but then it's also grief over losing her baby. And so was the solution really to put her on lithium and send her away to a facility? Like, ugh. And I'll get into later why that's even more of an eerie parallel with Britney. So she starts off talking about that generational trauma, like I said, chapter 1. And so I say that that's especially noteworthy because you can see how the way Jamie Spears was raised with June impacted the way Britney was raised with Jamie. And that is so common in families where mental health is not properly treated. It spirals out into that generational trauma. I'm not saying this as a mental health professional. I'm saying this as someone who's been to a lot of therapy. And so I feel like I can say that with confidence, but I am not a mental health professional. Let me just preface with that. Something else that I thought was interesting too is Britney talks about in her early rise to fame, starting taking Prozac because she was super anxious. Honestly, I can imagine that's like a huge quantum leap to go from being in Kentwood to then being this household name. So I feel like that makes a lot of sense. But what was also interesting to note is there was early concern over her being too sexy. So as I talked about in my own background for loving Britney, that was something that was commonly talked about in headlines was she's too risque, she's too sexy, we shouldn't have our kids looking up to her because she's dancing around in her bra and panties on stage. Even though that's like literally she's so slay, and I feel like that's owning and claiming your sexuality. That's not, there's a difference between that and being promiscuous, but also who the fuck cares at the end of the day. Anyway, so I thought that was also really interesting to know, like early on talking about that concern over being too sexy. And I can imagine Britney then getting so in her head and getting really self-conscious because at this point she's 19, 18, like she's very young. And so you're super impressionable, even though you're considered an adult at that point. And then on like a more lighthearted note, what I thought was super cool in this chapter was Britney talking about Baby One More Time and recording that. So she had said that she had listened to Soft Cell's Tainted Love, which awesome 80s banger. And she said that she really liked the way the singer sounded in that song, like I don't know if raspy is necessarily the right word to use, but there's some sort of grit there. And so Britney intentionally didn't sleep the night before recording Baby One More Time to get her voice to have that sort of like sexy tone grit to it. So I thought that was super cool, that there was kind of like some inside scoop into the thought process behind the way she sounded in Baby One More Time. So that's that on chapters 1 through 10. We're ending with Oops, I Did It Again, so Britney's early fame, and we'll get into more with chapters 11 through 20. So chapters 11 through 20, we cover a shorter time frame. So we're looking at 2001 and 2006, but needless to say, incredibly action-packed. So this highlights a lot of Britney's career success with her different tours that she went on, new albums being released, Super Bowl halftime show, movie spots with the movie Crossroads, VMAs and music performances, and Slave for You, and Me Against the Music, working with Madonna, and singing with Michael Jackson. So there's just a lot of good stuff going on for Britney in terms of career at this point. So what I thought was super interesting is when Britney was talking about getting acting gigs, she actually said it was really hard for her to snap out of character. She felt like she was a super empathetic person who really channeled the character she was playing. So for her, it wasn't as easy as and cut and no longer being character. She would actually kind of embody the mannerisms of the characters that she was playing. So method acting without even trying to do method acting. So Britney had talked about it was actually really hard for her to do a lot of the TV and movie gigs. And she speaks about the Notebook casting, how she was considered to be within the movie The Notebook, which would have been so cool because it would have been Ryan Gosling and Britney from Mickey Mouse Club. But needless to say, wound up not doing that because A, Britney's a busy woman, and B, it's hard for her to kind of snap out of those roles when she's acting. So numerous tours, TV, talk show, movie gigs, a lot of things happening, and Britney is solidly in the spotlight. And another aspect of Britney's life that is very much in the spotlight is her relationship with Justin Timberlake. So in chapters 1 through 10, Britney talks about Mickey Mouse Club, loving Justin Timberlake and loving working with him and having that early bond, and how that manifested then into their relationship. And Britney talks about how she was so in love with Justin Timberlake. This was her first real big love, and it was very much in the spotlight. They're both these big pop stars, so I can imagine also feeling like you're with a kindred spirit who understands what you're going through. But as much as Britney was in love with Justin, and as much as the public loved this relationship, again, two mega pop stars together, it for sure had its issues. And so that's what I think is super noteworthy within these sections, is how Britney's relationships continued to add to the toll on her mental health. So Britney talks about with her relationship with Justin, he had cheated multiple times, and yes, she did cheat with Wade Robinson, but this was after Justin had cheated multiple times, and of course, Justin had never revealed that when he was talking shit about Britney cheating and wrote Cry Me a River, which is clearly about Britney. And if you've seen the music video, there's a blonde woman who plays the role of the cheater who looks very much like Britney. So Britney, from her side, Justin had cheated multiple times, and so Britney had only cheated after being heartbroken by Justin being so unfaithful to her. And I think the biggest bomb that gets dropped within this section is Britney talking about her abortion. So this was not commonly known. I mean, maybe like super in the know fans maybe knew, but I did not. And Britney talks about how she and Justin got pregnant, and it was unexpected. It was a surprise, but Britney ultimately wanted to keep the baby. Makes sense. You grew up Christian in the South. I can imagine your view on abortion is not viewed as positive. So she had wanted to keep the baby, but Justin did not. And he went even further to say he wanted an abortion, but he did not want it to be done in a hospital because he didn't want any media attention to be drawn to Britney getting this abortion, which meant that Britney basically took a bunch of pills to do an abortion at home in her bathroom. And she talks about it being a super painful experience. And she was in an incredible abdominal pain, obviously emotional and mental pain as well. And how Justin was playing his guitar for her while she was basically writhing in pain on the bathroom floor, which is like, bro, what the fuck? This is not a moment for you to break out and play Wonderwall on your guitar. So that, I think, is the biggest bomb that gets dropped within this section, is learning not only that Britney had an abortion, but that she had to do it at home without any medical help, and was in severe pain, all because her idiot boyfriend was worried about this getting out into the media. It's hard to be empathetic for Justin, honestly. After you hear about this, you're like, dude, what the fuck? Like, you hear about the cheating and you're like, you suck, you're an asshole. But then this takes it to a whole other level. And for me, as someone who continued reading this book, you can see how at this point, Britney's mental health really starts to break. There's already a toll being built up with that early rise to fame, but this was, in a sense, the nail in the coffin. Even though, maybe not the nail in the coffin, but this would, I would actually say, kind of reverse that, is the big catalyst in her mental health decline. So Britney and Justin, they continued to date even after the abortion, but eventually the relationship did end. And Britney talks about how devastating this was, how she felt like she didn't have enough time to heal from this heartbreak because she was expected to go on tour. She went on the Onyx Hotel tour, and she talks about how that was the worst tour experience of her life because she really had to push through the pain of being broken up with. It's like honestly twofold. Like, she had this abortion and was expected to get back on the crazy train that is being a mega pop star. But then after this heartbreak from the person that made you do something you did not want to do, I can imagine that made you hurt tenfold. And so she talks about not having enough time to heal from this and eventually moving back to Louisiana for a bit to tend to herself. But even at that point, like, there just wasn't enough time for her to be out of the spotlight. So you feel really sad for Britney at this point, because for most normal people, you're able to take time to heal. Like, yes, we all live busy lives in some way, shape, or form, but she needed to recoup and take care of herself. But the demand on her being a pop star would not have allowed her to take more time for herself. So I would say that's probably like the biggest dynamic that's going on within these sections. But even after all the craziness that Britney went through with that relationship, she is still doing her thing on tour, releasing music. She's still been the pop star that she is. She's still killing it. She is super, super popular. And then after breaking up with Justin, she also goes to Vegas with friends, and she talks about getting married to one of her friends from Kentwood and how that got annulled super quickly, and her parents were concerned, why the hell are you doing something like this? This seems super reckless. Whereas Britney wasn't meaning for it to be reckless. She was just trying to find some lightness in the darkness that was her life at that point. As I said, the Onyx Hotel tour, she talks about how that was a miserable experience. And she kind of ends this chapter segment talking about meeting K-Fed and how he was someone for her that could just be that rock, hold her. So she found a lot of initial healing from being around him and being with him, and then talks about eventually getting married and having kids with K-Fed. So that's how this section ends. Like I said, I feel like the biggest takeaways are the Justin Timberlake dynamic and how it was a lot more heinous than we had thought. And then seeing how that resulted in Britney struggling to continue to push through. And then eventually finding some solace with K-Fed. And as you know, that doesn't last for super duper long. So let's get into chapters 21 through 30.
It's Britney, bitch.
Chapters 21 through 30, we're going over the years 2006 to 2009, which I am dubbing the blackout era and pre-conservatorship era. So at this point in time, Britney is a new mom. She's had her boys, Sean Preston and Jaden James. And she talks about loving being a mom, but obviously that coming with so many hardships, including struggling with postpartum depression and also feeling like this overly empathetic mama bear and even feeling super protective of Jamie Lynn Spears at this point in time, which first time mentioning her, which is surprising. I thought maybe it would come up at another point, but honestly, to me, she's super irrelevant, and we'll get into why. But so she's talking about while she loves being a mom, there were a lot of struggles with being a new mom. And she talks about even at this point how her relationship with K-Fed actually was starting to fray. He was trying to pursue his own spotlight and try to get into the music scene, and how he had felt really jealous and inferior to Britney being this mega pop star, which to an extent I understand, but Britney had said, and this is like super ironic. Let me flip to the page that this is at. She had talked about how K-Fed landed the Super Bowl commercial for Nationwide, and how in this commercial he's playing a fast food worker who's trying to become famous, and how she said that after he got that opportunity, she basically never saw him again. He was off trying to pursue his own thing, trying to get into the entertainment business. And it's just so ironic, like the ego of this man. Like, you're literally getting made fun of on national television, but you somehow now think that you're too good for your wife who's Britney Spears. Okay, whatever. Anyway, so with K-Fed trying to do his own thing, it led to a great schism in the relationship, and it was beyond repair and led to them going through a divorce. And this happened in 2006. So Britney's 25 and now the mother of two young boys and a super, super famous pop star, and also a single mom. So she talks about how at this point in time, she was deeply struggling. How could she not be? She talks about how she felt like she could never trust people again. First, it was loving Justin Timberlake and that crumbling, and now K-Fed and that crumbling. She's really struggling to gain her trust in other people. And I can imagine going through postpartum and being this overly empathetic mama bear, struggling with paranoia too. Adding on top of that, the paparazzi taking pictures of her young boys and trying to get her at every point or any point that they could while she's driving a car, going to Starbucks, like whatever it is, like the paparazzi's trying to capture her every move, especially with these kids. And so definitely that would add to her mama bear persona too. She talks about how at this point she had entered her party phase, which if you zoom out, she's 25. That doesn't seem abnormal, but unfortunately she was held to these crazy high standards being someone in the public eye. And so the media blew a lot of her going out of proportion because A, clickbait, B, this is how the media tends to treat women. She talks about befriending Paris Hilton and how Paris Hilton was such a sweet, kind person to her who understood, hey, like you've been going through this divorce, you're fighting for full custody for your kids with someone who also wants full custody. She just very much understood Britney, where it seemed like most of the world did not understand what she was going through. And with the accusations of partying to her, Britney says, look, guys, like I was drinking and I also was taking Adderall. Adderall's ADHD meds for kids. Like, I'm not taking anything super crazy. This is getting blown out of proportion. And she even talks about the famous, crazy, wild night that she had with Paris and Lindsay. That was photographed by the paparazzi. She basically says, y'all, we were just drinking. That's all it was. So the public is viewing her as someone who's this crazy party girl. Unfortunately, she starts losing her trust in her family and support of her family because they are now echoing the same thing to her. She talks about how she had one night where she went out partying came back drunk, and her mom lost it on her, saying she shouldn't be doing this. You're a mother, Britney. You should not be out drinking. And Britney is kind of surprised by this because her father's an alcoholic. Alcoholism runs in her family. And her mom had to put up with so much bullshit from Britney Spears being an abusive drunk. And Britney's like, I was never abusive. I don't understand why I'm being subjected to changing. And Britney Spears wasn't. So she's like, Mom, why are you taking this out on me when all along you should have been doing this with Dad? So she talks about how it's really unfair and how women in the spotlight are told that they have to be perfect, that they have to be innocent, that in a sense you kind of have to be virginal. I didn't even talk about that with the earlier chapters, but Britney also discussed like the obsession that the media had with, is she a virgin, is she not, especially when dating Justin Timberlake. So now coming into the mid 2000s, late 2000s, there's still that extension of Britney's supposed to be this role model and perfect and not supposed to be out drinking, even though, like I said, she's 25. Let's zoom out, people. Like, this makes a lot of sense. She's not doing anything abnormal. Britney talks about how now being accused of partying too much, she kind of felt isolated from her friends because now there's this pressure to not go out. And she felt like she didn't have the support of her family, so she just felt super lonely. And that added a whole other dimension to her mental health struggles. She talks about how with the messy divorce with K-Fed, they both wanted full custody of the boys, and K-Fed was making it his mission to make Britney seem as out of control as possible. And part of that was keeping Sean and Jaden away from Britney for weeks on end. So when they would go visit the K-Fed, he would take his kids away from Britney, and Britney would come over and be like, hey, where are my kids? Like, it's time to hand them over. Like, we're in this co-parenting somewhat agreement, but he would keep the kids away from her, and she would lose it because who wouldn't as a young mom? And I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter what age you are. If someone's keeping your kids away from you, like, you're just going to lose your shit. So K-Fed kind of doing that added more to the narrative of Britney being out of control, and that's what the paparazzi was capturing. And Britney talks about the shaved head incident, which I feel like took headlines by storm in 2007, which was after Britney had tried to get her boys from K-Fed's house and unsuccessfully wasn't able to do that. She was chased down by the paparazzi, and she kind of had her fuck you moment and said, hey, I'm going to give the world what they're asking. Everyone thinks I'm out of control. I'm just going to shave my head. Fuck you to everyone. Whatever. So she does this, and of course captured by the paparazzi, and now everyone thinks Britney's nuts because she shaved her head. It's crazy when you zoom out and get perspective. Like, she didn't kill anyone, people. She's not being abusive. She had been partying. She's 25. She shaved her head. Okay, what's the issue? Britney really highlights how this level of perfectionism that was put on her made even shaving her head look like she was someone that needs to be in an insane asylum. It's crazy. It's like, I look back on 2007, and that's really the year pre-conservatorship, or 2009, 2008 is when it started. So this is pre-conservatorship buildup. It's wild to me that Britney shaving her head and trying to get her kids from K-Fed's house because he's keeping her away from them. Britney coping with all this by going out, but not doing anything, honestly, too abnormal. That this is making a case for her to be in a conservatorship. And also, she recorded the Blackout album during this time, which was hugely successful. She talks about how it was so easy for her to write that while her life was being fragmented, how she's getting torn in so many other aspects of her life, Blackout album was what was keeping her grounded and sane, and it was super easy for her to record. She did it beautifully. It's really wild that it goes to show the power that the media has over perception of people, and how it can be hard to zoom out and see what's going on objectively for what it is, and not be in a way brainwashed by the media's skewed perception. Anyway, that is my current soapbox. I will get on another one at some point. Britney talks about how she also addresses like the umbrella hitting the paparazzi car moment. Again, that was also a few days after she had shaved her head, trying to get her kids back from K-Fed, not able to do so. She was with her cousin Allie. Paparazzi was harassing her. I feel like that's like the most mild thing you could do is hit a paparazzi's car with an umbrella. I'm pretty sure there have been worse things done in the world. But again, people are now like, whoa, she's off her rocker. It's wild. Ugh. Anyway, Britney then talks about how she was told by her team that if she goes to rehab, she has a shot at full custody for her kids. Britney's like, I don't have a drug problem or a drinking problem, but whatever it is to get my kids back, I am willing to do. And so she makes the agreement to go into rehab. Eventually, then coming out of rehab, we have this famous bathroom incident with Jaden. And this is what sparked the 72-hour hold, or the first 72-hour hold that she was in. So she's has to hand over her kids to K-Fed. Again, they're fighting for custody at this point. And she hits a point where she snaps. She's like, I don't want to. You would think it's kind of fair because he had held their kids against her for so long, making sure she couldn't visit him for like numerous occasions. It's like this one time she does that, she's sentenced to a 72-hour hold. It's an interesting parallel with Justin Timberlake had cheated on her so many times. She cheats on him once, he writes a pop hit, and she is made to look like the bad guy. This is a similar situation where K-Fed has held their kids against Britney for so long and for so many different instances. But as soon as Britney does that, she's then put in a 72-hour hold. It just seems like whenever Britney makes something that's like a mistake, it's blown out of proportion. So this poor girl, again, like I had said at the beginning, it just seems like she never has a chance. So she's put in the 72-hour hold. This is like the height of paranoia, right? How could this not be the height of paranoia? She eventually, coming out of this experience, finds her way to dating a photographer who was super wild, encouraged her to be wild. Honestly, that's probably the last thing that was needed. But Britney at this point was looking to escape. She's not able to see her kids when she wants to. The world thinks that she's insane. So I can imagine at this point you would snap as a person. She also talks about how she was taking Adderall even more frequently. So at this point, now we're talking about 2008. And this is when the conservatorship begins. And Britney is sentenced to be in a conservatorship with Lou Taylor from TriStar Entertainment, who had gotten very cozy and comfortable with Jamie Spears and wanted to be business partners with Britney in a sort of way. But eventually TriStar, now being associated with the business that is Britney Spears, proposed the conservatorship with Jamie Spears being a part of that deal. And so basically all the crazy headlines, the behavior that Britney was publicly captured, participating in, I guess is the way to say it, led her to then being put in a conservatorship. And we'll get into more of what entailed in that with chapters 31 through 40. So wanted to give a little bit more color to Britney's conservatorship, what it entails, because that was also addressed in this section before we get into chapters 31 through 40. So Britney had been hospitalized January 2008, and then shortly afterwards was put in a conservatorship led by Lou Taylor from TriStar Entertainment. Lou Taylor and Jamie Spears started to become buddy-buddy and developed a working relationship with each other. And then TriStar got involved with the business that is Britney Spears. So this conservatorship that was set up, so Britney's dad, with the help of Lou Taylor, set up basically two forms of conservatorship. It's the conservatorship of person and conservatorship of estate. So the conservatorship of person controls the details of the conservatee's life, like where they live, what they eat, what car they drive, medications they take, all that good stuff. And so that was appointed to none other than Jamie Spears. Then we have the conservator of the estate, and that manages the estate worth, which for Britney, millions on millions of dollars. And the conservator of estate manages the conservatee's affairs to keep them from being subject to undue influence or fraud. This was taken up by Jamie Spears in conjunction with a lawyer called Andrew Wallet, who would get paid basically $500,000 a year to be Britney's conservator of estate. So wild. Anyway, that's some more color on the conservatorship. I also forgot to note that around this time the conservatorship was put in place, Jamie Lynn was seeking emancipation from her parents. I feel like that wasn't talked about in the media, or at least maybe I wasn't as aware of that. That kind of goes to show that there's something up with the Spears household. And maybe it's both Britney and Jamie Lynn being erratic and trying to be controlling of their lives and they hate their parents. It could be that. Or it could be that their parents are hella controlling and they're seeking freedom from this. So anyway, wanted to add that. Now let's get into the next 10 chapters. So I will be honest, at this point, I low-key feel exhausted by the bullshit that Britney had to go through during her entire life, let's be real, but her time in the spotlight. And it gets even more exhausting now the conservatorship is in place for chapters 31 through 40. So now we're talking about the years of 2010 to 2018. So the conservatorship has begun, and a little bit about the ground rules of that conservatorship. So Britney had a court-appointed lawyer, and Britney was told that she couldn't seek out her own lawyer. She comes to find out 13 years later that that was bullshit. She could have always gotten her own lawyer. That was within her rights, even being in a conservatorship. So it started off with the ground rules being lies. With that being said, she would get her phone taken away. She had her texts and calls monitored at all times. She was told what medication she could take. They could change up her medication if they saw fit. She was told where she had to live. She was controlled on what she could eat. Her father had her on a very strict diet, especially for him. He's like, being a performer, you have to be on the strict diet, but quite frankly, what she described in the book, it was just his way to exert more control over her. And if she were to have fries or a cheeseburger, she'd get reprimanded for it. She's essentially enslaved in this conservatorship and is not able to make decisions for herself. And I didn't even address who this person was up until now in the book, but she had a longtime assistant and family friend, Felicia, who was by her side through all of it, through her early rise to fame, all her tours. But then Felicia was no longer around once the conservatorship was put into place. So she didn't even have someone who had been a rock for her through it all. And Britney had described being in this conservatorship as feeling like Groundhog Day. Each day was the same. It was on repeat. It was mind-numbing. The joy was sucked out of her music and out of her art. She was also able to see that the conservatorship was put into place so other people can make money. Like I had said earlier, Andrew Wallet made $500,000 a year being Britney's conservator of estate. And you may be thinking while you're reading the section, why did Britney not fight to get out of the conservatorship sooner than she could? As I said, she didn't even know she could seek out her own lawyer, but Britney was constantly worried about her kids being taken away from her. She had gone through that with K-Fed, and the conservatorship made it very clear that they would use Britney's kids as a way to reward her to work. Isn't that fucked up? So she did everything she could for her kids. And yes, she did have moments where she would fight back, she would rebel, she would get caught, and then she'd get defeated. She felt like she couldn't game the system of the conservatorship. And so she had felt defeated. And quite frankly, when someone has their basic rights taken away from them, and also famously in Britney's court hearings in 2021, she talked about being forced to be on birth control even though she had wanted to have kids. Like, again, like very basic bodily autonomy rights taken away from you. Your energy's depleted and you don't know how to fight. And when you do fight and you get caught, you're defeated. And so that's what Britney portrays being in this conservatorship. She also talks about in this section being compared to men who have their freedom. And let me see if I can find that page. It is somewhere. Actually, I think this part's a bit more interesting to read. Page 182. I actually have a lot highlighted in this section. So maybe more of like a direct read from the book. So Britney was quoted she had talked about like men in power, men in the spotlight don't have these controls put on them. But this kind of goes into Britney questioning why she's in this conservatorship to begin with. She says, if I was so sick that I couldn't make my own decisions, why did they think it was fine for me to be out there smiling, waving, and singing and dancing in a million time zones a week? She was talking about being on the circus tour, being on Good Morning America, traveling Europe and Australia, being in LA, shooting a segment for Ellen. She's like, if I can do all this and stick to the schedule, why can't I decide what food I put in my body? Why can't I have say in what medication I'm on? Why can't I do these things? Why can't I see my kids more often than the conservatorship's allowing me to? And what's interesting is Britney answers this question of why am I in this if I'm so sick? If people think I'm so sick, then why am I able to do all these things? She's like, there's one good reason for it. And it's because at this time, we're not talking about like 2009, the circus tour had grossed more than $130 million. She points out it's all about money at the end of the day. It's power-hungry, money-hungry people that saw her as a cash cow and hit her when she was most vulnerable. But really, she just needed help and support and the right mental health services to help her get through what she needed to. Anyway, Britney talks about feeling like a zombie. Life feels like Groundhog's Day. She doesn't have the joy in her music anymore. Things are on repeat. She's not loving what she's doing. Talks about her dad body shaming her, saying she's too fat. She needs to lose weight. She needs to be on these crazy diets. Yet she's talking about, even though the light has kind of left her eyes, she's still winning awards. She's still generating money for the business that is Britney Spears. But she's still in this conservatorship ? So I can imagine that makes you feel like you're gaslighting yourself. You're like, I'm able to perform top tier. I'm a top pop artist, but I have my texts and calls monitored. What the hell? So Brittany talks about how this is like the death to the woman in me. And I really want to read this little paragraph. So she talks about being in this conservatorship. The woman in me was pushed down for a long time. Hence the Woman in Me book. They wanted me to be wild on stage the way they told me to be and to be a robot the rest of my life. I felt like I was being deprived of those good secrets of life, those fundamental supposed sins of indulgence and adventure that make us human. They wanted to take away that specialness and keep everything as rote as possible. It was the death to my creativity as an artist. An artist needs their creativity in order to be happy and do the work that they need to do. Or that they want to do. I shouldn't say need to do, but the work that they want to do. And so it's really sad that Britney continues to speak about this theme of being deprived. She talks about, at this point, in the later 2010s, having her Vegas residency. So she's been chosen to do Vegas residency, a multi-year residency. And she talks about how, at this point, she's still very beaten down, diet controlled. And she actually turned to energy supplements to help her get her energy back. Now, what's wild is we're talking about supplements here, people. But yet the conservatorship was so freaked out about her taking something that they didn't specifically tell her to take that she was sent to rehab for being on energy supplements. Isn't that absurd? Ugh, poor girl. She talks about even further in Vegas, she had an allowance, like an allowance a child gets, like a weekly allowance, monthly allowance. And she talks about how she wasn't able to go to parties. If there were drugs or alcohol involved at the parties, she wasn't able to go. And what's interesting is if you look at interviews of her at the time, she talks about how, oh, I can't go to those parties, or people get really crazy in Vegas. I'm not really in that scene. It's because she wasn't allowed to be in that scene. I'm not saying she should have been off partying, crazy, doing things, but like she didn't have the freedom to even be associated with those types of people or to be at parties. She talks about how light during this time was, she actually was able to teach dance to young kids. I had no idea about that. And she talks about how that brought her a lot of enjoyment. She also talks about the Glory album that gets released. And I believe this was 2016. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments if you want to, but I'm pretty sure it's 2016. She talks about how that brought back her creativity as an artist. How the Vegas show was super regiment. If Britney wanted a dance move changed, it resulted in medication getting switched up. If Britney wanted new songs to be added, she would get shut down. But Glory gave her some sort of outlet and freedom. And she felt like she's kind of coming back to herself. She talks about meeting her now ex-husband, Sam Ashgari. She talks about having gone to AA at this point. Again, Britney never had an alcohol problem, but she did talk about finding some solace in going to Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, also emphasizing this theme throughout her life of having no breaks, and now this conservatorship mandating no breaks, which is wild. Towards the end of this section, she talks about hitting her wall, but in a way getting her confidence again. She talks about how she's like, I've had enough of this roteness. You guys are using this as a way to make money from me. You're holding my kids against me, and they're my pride and joy, so I'll do anything I can to see them, obey whatever orders, but I'm having enough of it. She talks about the third year in Vegas. She's just like, I am done. And how this led to an increase in confidence. She started saying no to things more, and she was unafraid to say no to things. And this all culminated at the end of her Vegas residency in 2017. There was a re-announcement of a 2018 Vegas residency, or announcement of another Vegas residency for 2018. Britney talks about how when that was announced, crazy screaming fans out in Vegas, but once they announced everybody missed Britney Spears, she walked down the stage, walked out, didn't perform, didn't speak. She was like, I'm done with this. And that actually concludes chapter 40. So setting the scene for Britney's, she's done with the bullshit. She's done with it. And we'll get into the final 9 chapters, 41 through 49, to wrap up The Woman in Me. Also, I forgot to mention, so the AA thing. So she, like I said, she was, Britney was taking energy supplements because she is on this insane work schedule for the Vegas residency tour. And she also is probably nutrient deprived based on the strict diet that her dad has her on. So she said her dad showed her mercy and said that she could be an outpatient from the rehab center as long as she went to AA 4 times a week. There's so much that doesn't add up. I'm like, what is this logic of she's taking energy supplements that you can literally purchase anywhere, and they're not harmful or addictive. She literally needs them to perform. Yet the solution to her taking energy supplements without the consent of the conservatorship is, okay, but you can go to AA 4 times a week and that's your penance. The math is just really not mathing. Anyway, chapters 41 through 49, here we go.
Hashtag free Britney.
All right, chapters 41 through 49. How did this pen get here? So it's 2019 to the present day. And again, these energy supplements have become an issue with the conservatorship. And Britney's dad said, we found energy supplements in your purse again. We are sending you to rehab yet again. Oh my word. I would love to know the name of the energy supplement she's taking. I'm like, watch it have been like Celsius, or Celsius is an energy supplement, but you know what I mean. Watch it have been like some mainstream energy supplement brands, and they're like losing their shit because it didn't come from them. So we told Britney, we're going to send you to a facility, and it's a small rehab center in Beverly Hills, and it'll only cost you $60,000 a month. Like, what? Granted, she has millions upon millions of dollars, but what? Really? So she's sentenced to go to this rehab facility, and she talks about how she didn't want to go. She challenged her dad. She's like, but what if I don't go? And he was quoted saying, "We'll make you look like a fucking idiot, and trust me, you will not win. It's better me telling you to go versus a judge in court telling you." This is so sad. This is family against family. I can't imagine being in a dynamic this extreme. I think so many people on a way smaller scale can relate to having controlling parents that are telling you what to do, what to say, what to eat. But this is like that times a billion, because this is like legally mandated parental controls on her life. And so Britney is now sent to rehab, and she talks about how she was put on lithium while she was in rehab and how she hated being on lithium, how it made her feel super foggy, not herself. She felt like she was in such a daze. And the rehab facility, she had mandated therapy that she had to go to. She didn't find much support at the center, but she does talk about a few people that she came to trust, such as, I don't believe she even said the nurse's name, but there was this one nurse who she said was super real as hell, who was a big support for her. And interestingly enough, while she was at this rehab center, this is when she became aware of the Free Britney movement. And it's because of this nurse that she grew to have a bond with, showing her someone online with a Free Britney shirt. And so Britney started to get some hope again and saying, okay, some people are looking out for me. Some people are aware that what I'm going through is not right, and they're suspecting there's abuse going on. I'm bringing my attention back to Jamie Lynn Spears in this chapter's sequence, because Britney had been reaching out to family members saying, why am I in this facility? Why is all this going on? And she tried reaching out to Jamie Lynn, who said, stop fighting it. There's nothing you can do about it, so stop fighting it. Again, Britney has lost the support of her family, and it's completely dissolved. They're pitted against her, all because of this conservatorship. Britney talks about getting out of rehab and feeling a lot better eventually when she was able to get off of lithium, and she was starting to get some semblance of control. She was beginning to manifest the end of the conservatorship. She had absolutely had it. At this point, it would have been 12 years. Maybe we're also talking about 2021, where she's like, I've just had it and I need to get out of this. So she talks about calling up the court-appointed lawyer and in a prayer-like regiment way, talking to him twice a week to see what are her options. What can she do to get out of this conservatorship? And also to see, is this lawyer really representing her and on her side, or is he on the side with the conservatorship? So Britney, at a certain point in June of 2021, eventually decides to make a 911 call accusing her father of conservatorship abuse. Shortly thereafter, Britney is brought into court, and this is the first time we're able to hear Britney talk about the conservatorship, and the world's eyes are completely opened up to everything she's gone through. A lot of people at this time, and still now, follow Britney's Instagram page, and so many of us are like, what the hell is she posting? She's doing these weird voices, these weird dances, she's showing us her outfits. Seems kind of like weird behavior. Britney goes on to say, like, for her, when you've been sexualized for so long, traumatized for so long, it feels good to get some sort of control in your life, even if it seems super weird to other people. So I think a lot of us, though, like, Britney's voice kind of sounded weird in those Instagram posts, but when you hear the recording in 2021 of the court hearing, she speaks in a very I don't know, normal way. There's no like really weird pitch to her voice. She's speaking fast. You can tell she's nervous, obviously, because she doesn't know what's going to come of this.
I will be honest with you, I haven't been back to court in a long time because I don't think I was heard on any level when I came to court the last time.
But she speaks super honestly over what she's gone through this conservatorship, talking about being forced to be on an IUD, forced to take medication, forced to be on lithium, forced to be in rehab. Her family her family and the people in the conservatorship using her kids as a way to control her. And it's at this point where I feel like the Free Britney movement moves from conspiracy theory to an accurate portrayal of what's going on in Britney's life. So Britney talks about feeling so free, so liberated, even after talking about even that hearing in June 2021. And at this point, she's not out of the conservatorship, but she's starting to gain that sense of confidence and freedom. After that, she finds a new lawyer, Matthew Rosengart, because all along she could have sought her own lawyer. Insane. And Matthew Rosengart is able to work with her for the next 4 to 5 months to then secure her freedom out of this conservatorship. And now we're at this point today where Britney is out of the conservatorship. She's able to enjoy the pleasures of life that she wasn't able to before. She can go on vacation. She can go jet skiing. She talks about loving going jet skiing. She's able to be with her kids. She can drink a cocktail if she wants to. She no longer has these controls on her life that were there before. Britney doesn't talk about the divorce with Sam in this book, by the way, probably because it's so recent, did not make it into the final cut with this. But the book leaves us with Britney feeling a lot more like herself. And albeit she admits still recovering from all the abuse in the conservatorship, she talks about having migraine headaches because of all the anger inside of her is manifesting in migraines. So she talks about still processing everything she needs to process. But she has said she's like, I feel a lot healthier in my body, even with these migraines, because now I can eat what I want. So my body's actually strong and healthy and not nutrient depleted from like the veggies and chicken diet that her dad had put her on. So I will say, as a fan, you feel elevated after reading this because you know that there is some sort of peace in Britney's life. And granted, as someone who's in the limelight, there are always going to be some sort of pressures and controls on her life, but it's not going to be to the extent of the conservatorship again. And that feels amazing and it feels very rewarding. And overall, what I can say about reading this book as a fan is Britney's life was more heartbreaking than even people in the Free Britney movement had anticipated. Even with this immense fame that she's able to cultivate for herself and all these amazing awards, accolades, this popularity, the fame, she paid a huge price for it. And Britney's story is, I want to say it's not unique, but it's super unique to her. But in a sense, it's not unique to women in fame who, in this patriarchal society that we live in, of course, women are going to be scrutinized for their every move. And if they're not being perfect, if they're not performing to the way, or if they're not acting in the way that society at large wants them to, they're going to be viewed as rebellious, as out of control, as someone that needs help. And that was the case with Britney. I hope from Britney Spears' story, we can all learn as a society how we can view women in power, how we can treat women in power. And I hope it brings to light these biases that we may have about women in fame. So with that being said, that is my review of The Woman in Me. I'm hella exhausted. I am drained. I feel like I have compassion fatigue reading this book and going through and vocalizing how it made me feel. But I hope you, as the listener, have enjoyed this. I hope that you have an idea as to what Britney was talking about. You can come away feeling like I can speak to the woman in me, because Megan basically wrote a college level essay and analysis on this book. So With that being said, Psychonauts, and I hope that you're able to also have more compassion for someone like Britney Spears, who was so misunderstood as this celebrity figure and so mistreated, and we're able to come away and learn that you can't always judge a book by its cover. There's a lot more going on the inside, and I admire Britney's bravery in being able to share her story and share her truth. So with that being said, Psychonauts, until next time, take care.